Hello, internet, or maybe I should say the internet. I am Pastor Tim.
I am Prince Lyle.
And we are the Pastor and the Prince podcast. Welcome. This is going to be an interesting show today.
To say the least.
Oh boy. Do you have your coffee?
I do. And
all right. So
I actually had somebody to tell me stop drinking coffee before I do stuff because I was already too energetic.
Well, there's nothing wrong with energy.
I won't say the name, but her last name is like a flower.
Rose.
Rose is her last name.
You busted her out on
The
international.
people who know who I'm talking about, they're probably laughing right about that.
I'm sure they are. And you're busting out that poor Daisy on international wavelengths that we refer to as the internet. So, oh boy, I'm glad that that's not me, but I've been busted out before too. So it's okay.
So speaking of coffee, it's like, lest our hearts drown with the coffee of the world we forget thee. You know what that melody is?
I was going to say that sounds like the Black national anthem.
Yes. It's called Lift Every Voice by James Weldon Johnson.
Yes, and we appreciate Dr. Johnson for those lyrics and words bringing us into the fold. But I like the way that you did that.
Aha.
I like that.
Because you were talking about coffee, so I didn't want to change your subject. But I wanted to bring in the national Black anthem. Oh, and which used to be called the National Negro Anthem.
Yes, they had to drop the word Negro for obvious reasons. Let's pause for the demise of the word Negro.
Yes, and all other variations.
All right, that was enough.
Right. I actually saw a group sing it in replacement of the Star Spangled Banner at a game not long ago.
Wow.
I know.
I shouldn't say wow, but interesting.
This is Black History Month, so maybe that's why that happened that way. We just got into February, so welcome everybody. Welcome to the shortest month of the year.
The shortest month of the year, also known as Black History Month,
formerly known as Black History Week.
Yes, I remember that from the episode on Good Times.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Michael Evans. He brought that in.
We talked about that at another episode.
We did. That was early on. We talked about that, and I thought that was a interesting way to introduce Good Times to my children.
Ooh.
Yes.
I forgot about that. They don't know. They weren't around.
They were not around when Good Times were airing.
Ooh.
No, sir. Wow. So I wanted to introduce them so that they would know if they hear somebody say dynamite, they would have an idea of where that came from. All right, we need to let you know what we're talking about today. Today's topic it's serious. Same thing. Yes, it's Black history, but different day. And this is one of those times where I can say I'm truly at a loss for words, but it's not in the classic sense of a loss for words, but it causes us to pause because it's still hurting people and it's taking people out.
Absolutely.
And for us, there was one thing that my wife shared with me the other day about Black History Week. She said, it shouldn't, or Black History Month rather. She said, Black history is truly American history.
Correct.
Period.
Yes.
There shouldn't be a color. We don't, and maybe we do have history months for the other ethnic groups, which is great. But those of us that are here in America, this is our history.
It is.
Now, the question is, do we want to recognize?
It depends on who's embracing it, and who wants to embrace that history that is ours, and that kind of brings me to the word of the week. Also,
the word of the week.
Yep. So, because there are some who. You said that there's some things that are hurtful, that are hurting various people and taking some people out. One of those things is murder at the hand of the police and police brutality. And it's targeted toward a certain group of people in America and actually around the world.
And
'Cause I
pause
saw
on
other
that.
countries as well.
Yeah, pause on that for just a moment. Now, we're not policemen or police persons, bashers.
No, of course not. My dad was a member of the police
And I was
force.
going to say, and now we almost sound like, other ethnicities saying, oh, I have a good friend who is a fill in the blank. You know what that
Right.
sounds like. But for
I'm
both
not
of us,
racist.
right. Or we can say policist in this particular function. We just made a new term and coined it, policist. You heard it here first.
Anti-policist.
Yes, or anti-police.
Right.
Either way.
Right, we're not
Well,
anti-police.
when I thought about that, when I thought about racist, they'll always put the ist
Gotcha.
at the end. So we're
Gotcha.
not policist or non-policist. No, we believe in law enforcement. As a matter of fact, anytime someone is out of line, even in one of our churches, that was one of the things that we let our congregants know. Please call the police, and they will handle the matters the way that they handle them. But back to your word of the day, I just wanted to say that we are friends of the men in blue, and we're praying for them daily, that our Heavenly Father will continue to protect them as they are hopefully protecting us and taking us into our word of the week.
Well, I know our podcast is only 30 minutes long, and there's so much to cover in each of these topics. But one of the things that you said is that you believe in the police and law enforcement. And that reminds me of another buzzword where people say, I believe in law and order. And that actually meant something else. It's
Yes,
a
it
buzzword. It's actually a call, it's almost a call to action. But let me go on to the word of the week.
And
before
maybe
get into that.
Yes, funny you mentioned that call. That may be something that we can talk about later.
I'd love to.
And maybe we can bring one of our family or friends on the line who is in law enforcement to share some tools and techniques that we can share with our listeners on things that you can do, because both of us, we've probably been, involved in what some refer to as the talk.
Yeah.
And they can provide us with some additional information regarding that. So, you just heard it here first. We're just sharing with you some of the shows that are coming up. So you definitely want to come back. You don't want to miss that particular show.
Yeah. So a word of the week is police. This is a word that everybody is familiar with. I think young, old, black, white, Hispanic, purple, people of color, Caucasian, everybody is familiar with this word, police. Of course, depending on what ethnicity you are a part of, you might call it a police or the popo, or
That's the slang or the colloquial expression.
That's the Urban Dictionary.
There you go.
But we're gonna go with the Oxford Dictionary. And,
Oxford.
Yeah, I like that one. It says it's called the civil force of a national or local government responsible for the prevention and detection of crime and the maintenance of public order.
Public order. Now, here's what's interesting. We're not going to focus on police as a broad topic.
No.
We're looking at something that just occurred we can say a few days ago. And this is with Amir Lock. Am I
Lock?
Lock. I was going to just
Amir Lock.
Amir Lock. I wanted to make sure I'm saying that name correctly. Now, those of you that have heard preachers in the past, normally what they would do is they would say a name and unfortunately butcher that name. And I didn't want to be one of those, but it looks like I'm in the camp.
That'll be another podcast.
Yes.
The pastor and the butcher.
The pastor
One
and the butcher.
same.
Yes. They're taking names and just doing a horrible injustice with them. But that word of the day kind of, connects with what's happening with, Mr. And unfortunately for us, he's no longer here.
Yeah.
Amir Lock.
Yeah. Amir Lock.
Amir Lock.
L-O-C-K-E.
L-O-C-K-E. Correct. Lock. He's no longer here.
Yeah.
To tell the story.
Yeah.
Similar to, I believe it was Breonna Taylor. Am I saying her name correctly?
Breonna Taylor.
Breonna Taylor.
Yep, exactly.
She's no longer here to tell or to talk about her story either. And this is the part that makes things tough, when it's at the hands of law enforcement. And those of you that were, here in 2020, and that was old enough to know what was going on back on May the 25th, 2020, you'll know that was what? The day that we learned about the George Floyd killing at the hands of the police. Now, keep in mind, as we said, we're not here to bash our brothers in blue. We're just highlighting something that is happening in our current events.
Well, let me set it up, and for those that did not hear about the recent occurrences as we started to begin Black History Month, we were faced with yet another story, another headline, another hashtag, another hashtag.
Oh, no.
Another RIP hashtag. This one is Mr. Amir Lock. He was 22 years old, and he was fatally shot in an early morning raid at an apartment complex on Wednesday, February 2nd, when a SWAT team for the Minneapolis Police Department, y'all remember that, Minneapolis, Minnesota, where George Floyd was murdered. So the Minneapolis Police Department carried out a search warrant involving a homicide for the police in nearby St. Paul. So
in St. Paul.
Yeah. So I just wanted to kind of set it up.
And you know what? I want to talk about the type of warrant that was placed out there. And it's referred to as a no-knock warrant. However, I can't share it with you now because it is time for our
break. We're going to take a break.
We'll tell you on the other side of the break what is meant by this no-knock warrant. I am the pastor.
And I'm the prince.
And we are the Pastor and the Prince podcast.
We'll be right back.
On April 26 of this year, the Equal Justice Initiative will open both a memorial and museum in Montgomery, Alabama, dedicated to the victims of lynching in America post-Civil War. The memorial is called the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, and the museum is called the Legacy Museum, from enslavement to mass incarceration. Both were featured with a first look on 60 Minutes. What stood out most about the story were the pictures of the lynched Black people, often with several, up to as many as 15,000 people standing around watching the execution of a legal justice for crimes committed by Black Americans. In many of the communities, the lynchings were public spectacles, outings for the entire family to attend. This is Patrick Sturgis with a world of Black history.
We're back.
And here we are.
Yes, we're back. All right.
What we like to do like the Johnny Carson say, and here's Johnny.
I like Johnny Carson as well until Arsenio Hall.
Oh, yeah.
And then his announcer took it to the next level. He took it to the next level. And when he did that, I said, oh, my goodness. That's how you introduce. That's how you introduce.
I couldn't hold it quite as long as he did, though.
Yeah, but it's a valiant try. You know, as someone who was trained in operatic training, you did an excellent job there. I'll give you that.
Classical training.
Classical. I'm sorry, I was thinking opera.
It can be opera.
Okay.
Classical can be opera, but classical actually involves a number.
So there's a nuance between the two. That's actually good to know. We'll talk about that maybe another day as well. No-knock warrant is where we were headed with this. And this information is coming from the Cornell Law School under their Legal Information Institute. It was established in 1992. And this is what the supporters or the framers of this information say over at Cornell University. A no-knock warrant is a search warrant authorizing police officers to enter certain premises without first knocking and announcing their presence or purpose prior to entering the premises. Such warrants are issued when or where an entry pursuant to the knock and announce rule would lead to the destruction of the objects for which the police are searching or would compromise the safety of the police or another individual. That's what Cornell has to say about this no-knock warrant. Now, when I read that on the surface, it makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
because you don't want the perpetrator, the person whom you're pursuing, to two things. One, you don't want them to get away. And number two, you don't want them to destroy evidence.
That's true.
But it's the third item that just causes me
Can
harm.
I draw a comparison also? Because I the reason I understand that is because I always wanted to know what was the impetus behind warning people, like there would be traffic what do they call them, traffic stops or
traffic cop.
No. The checkpoints. That's what I mean. Checkpoints.
Okay, so you have the checkpoints.
Know about those.
Yes, I know about the checkpoints
where they would set up police at a certain point where people would either get off the freeway or interstate, as we called them down south, and they would actually be at a place where you could not avoid them. You couldn't go.
You could not go left or right.
So when you get off that exit or you turn that corner, they are right there saying, "Get over. Let's check for your insurance. Let's check for all of the things." So these are checkpoints, but at some point they started being required to let the public know somehow. They would tell the media, because we would get notifications that there's going to be a checkpoint today.
Now, I saw those. I saw those, and the times that I did see those were during the holidays. The holidays were times when they would let the news media would let you know that there will be increased police presence. That's how they would word it, so that you'll know, hey, be on high alert this weekend. It's a holiday weekend. It's a 3-day weekend. Therefore, there will be what they refer to here in California as sobriety checkpoints. It might be the same or similar down south with what you're referring to now, but that's how they did it here.
Yeah. So the no knock warrant on surface, I understand it, because like I said, I questioned, like, if you're trying to weed out people who don't have are not compliant in some area of the law and citizenship, then why would you warn them that you're about to check?
Yeah. You're and keep in mind, you're pursuing someone who is thought to be a criminal,
right?
And we're hoping that you've done your due diligence on the criminal before doing the things. And in most cases, I mean, and this is one of those situations I think we should call it out. And I don't know if this is going to be fair, and I'd even hate to bring up the author in this particular capacity, but it would be interesting to see how often this occurs. I want to say that these may be outlier cases, similar to what Malcolm Gladwell shared in his book Outliers, because what we hear about are those that go wrong and it's a fatality involved. My question really would be, rather than looking at what's happening, in the media right now with Amir Lock, well, how often does it happen in this region? Now, keep in mind, statistics can take you into a rabbit hole or a black hole, or even not provide you the information that you need. And I'm wondering, how often does that happen?
Well, I think not only is that a good question, how often does it happen, but I think it boils down to what's the value of the casualty when it happens. It's like the chase, the high-speed chase.
The high-speed chase.
Yeah.
I agree.
So that has been outlawed in some areas where they're not allowed to do the high-speed chase because there are casualties involved and potential other fatalities when they're chasing behind a criminal or chasing behind a perpetrator or alleged perpetrator.
Yes, alleged. I like that one better. You're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, not the court of the streets.
Exactly. But I think it's important to go back to why the police was created altogether, and who were they created to protect and serve.
Yes.
Because I don't know if you're familiar with the police code, the Police Act of 1829.
I am not. Share some more with us.
So the 1829 Metropolitan Police Act created a modern police force by limiting the purview of the force and its powers, and envisioning it as merely an organ of the judicial system. The job was apolitical, to maintain the peace and apprehend criminals for the courts to process according to the law. Now, if you back up, around that same time, you go back around that same time, the first publicly funded organized police force with officers on duty full time was created in Boston in 1838. Boston was a large shipping commercial center, and businesses had started hiring people to protect their property and safeguard their transport of goods. But the police also had an understanding that because they were slaves during that time, that whenever they would see slaves, that their job automatically was to look at the slaves as, you are not where you belong. You're not in place.
You're not in place.
You're not in place. So you're in the wrong area. So my job is to return you back to your owner before you end up doing some crime against somebody's property and business and so forth. So we have to look back at why the police was created in the beginning. I know there have been discussions about defunding the police, reimagining the police, all those things. But I think when you think about the casualties involved in the no-knock warrant, you have to think about, well, who were they protecting anyway? So did they really value who became a casualty?
Who was a casualty of what was created?
Yeah.
Not necessarily for your benefit.
Yeah, it wasn't
if
to
you
protect
are
black people.
You know, and I'm glad you said that.
And it wasn't to serve black people.
It wasn't to protect
or
black
serve
people. Wasn't established to serve black people.
Right.
We just so happen to receive our right, and therefore they must provide us with the same type or level of protection.
Now, I have to give this balance, because I want to say that this is not a black versus white issue. This is not necessarily a racist issue. There are bad apples in everything. And just like in the police force, just like in every other agency, because the person who is known as the father of modern policing was a white man. He was a Caucasian man. And August Vollmer.
August Vollmer.
V as in Victor, Ollmer. He was the first police chief of Berkeley, California. I actually thought he was on the East Coast, but he was actually here
on the West Coast.
Yeah, on the West Coast.
Interesting.
And he was the leading figure in the development of the field of criminal justice in the United States in the early 20th century. And he was the one who was concerned with not allowing the police to be so politicized and what we call today profiling. They didn't have that word back then,
right?
But he wanted to weed out some of those training and systematic ways that they would actually target one group of people over another. So he was considered the father of modern policing. Yes,
and interestingly enough, it's still. And here's the part, I wasn't even focused on bad actors. So I'm just going to pause right there and say, my focus isn't on the bad actors. My focus is on, I'll just say, the oops moments.
Yeah.
Oops, I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't bring a person back.
Yeah.
That was an administrative error.
Yeah.
I had an error in judgment. What's happening here is their errors are fatal to those of us who are on the recipient end of their error. Now, there are very few jobs. The police is one of those jobs. And I'm going to ask the listeners here, rather than me list a group of job sites that you can be on where a mistake could cost someone else's life. And my concern is always with life. As a pastor, it's about life and preserving it as best as possible to give everyone that same equal opportunity under, the heavens to see our Savior's face in peace. When that is impeded, or when that is, you can just say snuffed out by a mistake, that person no longer has the opportunity. And it's not necessarily on their own, we're all aware that at some point we're going to go. Hopefully we will go under natural causes. But when the causes are now at the hand of someone else, that's when we now should consider, well, who is responsible for this untimely death? And that's where I would grab the term untimely death. Because now, because of your actions, and it could have been because of the individual's action, but in this particular case, Amir Lock, at the end of it, from what I saw on the news, 10 seconds later, you know, and I realized training. I realize that you want to be safe. I want our officers to be safe. I want them to be able to go home to their families, but we want our families to be able to see our families in the morning. We would love to see a judge, you know, rather than being executed on the spot. And and words like executed, they will harbor up feelings that, you know, are not, and for me to use that word executed, that's a tough one.
But I don't like to euphemize. I like to say what it is. It's just like when I talk about police murders, because Tamir Rice was murdered. Amir Lock was murdered. Eric Garner was murdered. His mother. I remember she was being interviewed. Eric Garner was choked, and he was the first one who said, "I can't breathe." In New York, he was killed by New York policemen. And Gwen Carr, his mother, she was being interviewed, and they asked her, "Did you watch the video of George Floyd?" She said, "No, I never watched it." She said, "I heard people talking about it, but I could not watch it. Because it would stir up too many memories."
And speaking of could not watch, it could have been because of trauma that she's experienced.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about that in a later episode.
In a later episode, for those of you that have experienced trauma, for those of you that feels that, you know, therapy is either good or bad, we have a episode coming from an outstanding guest. And you know what? Before we even talk about the guest, let's go ahead and take our final break.
Okay.
We'll be right back after these messages. We're back. All right. We were just talking about an upcoming guest that we're having in the near future.
Yes.
If it's not next week, it's going to be the week after. So it'll
Real
be here,
soon.
you know, at least a week or two. So you need to come back.
Yeah.
Boy.
Remember, we release these every Monday.
Monday.
Go to podcast.yahogo.org. And whenever you get up on Monday morning, somebody asks me, what time is it on? When you get up, that's when it's on. When you get up. Somebody actually got up at 4 a.m. and they were like, I'm a prove him wrong. I'm going to get up and I'm going to look for it. And it was there.
Yeah.
Ha ha.
You have to realize we are techie people here. So
and we're up when you're sleeping, by the way.
Yeah. And that's if you're on the East Coast. If you're on the West. So you're living our future. So we thank you, future self, for what you've done.
Yes.
But as we're wrapping up, what we're still, if you want to say, traumatized by in the death of yet another Black man during the month of Black History, just to remind us of just some of the things that has occurred in our own past. And hopefully these discussions will help us to paint a brighter future, so that hopefully this may not happen again, but I can't make that promise.
Yeah. And there's so many other things that we didn't even hit on. And that's why I called it same thing, different day, you know, because, you know, even recently Shane Lee Brown, who was incarcerated wrongly because, you know, he was jailed for 6 days, just mistaken identity.
So pause there. Yeah. What was his name again? You said
Shane Lee Brown.
Shane Lee Brown.
Yeah,
and when you hear the name, it sounds very generic, but there was something that you had shared with me on the Shane Lee Brown case.
Well,
what made that case unique?
He was mistaken for a white man who had a similar name, but this white man looked nothing like him. He was older. He had a criminal record. Shane didn't even have a criminal record, and so, you know, it was just and actually the gentleman who had a similar name, and I hate this because you have to search for the white names, for the white perpetrators. Now Shane Brown's name is there, but I have to do some research to find out who this convicted felon who really was guilty of all of this.
Guilty of the crimes.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because the white fella received what we don't receive, which is what we're crying for. Benefit of the doubt.
Like the young man who shot up Emmanuel, it was Emmanuel AME Church in South Carolina, he got offered a burger before he went, and like stopped off somewhere and got food and so forth. Our kids just lose their lives, and
they'll lose their lives. Yes.
Yeah.
Especially if they take someone else's life.
Right. And the thing I want to accentuate, to punctuate, is just that in our society, when these things happen, it not only affects the family, it not only affects those who know them personally, but it also affects the entire black race, because it breaks down our trust in the police. When we see lights behind us, we think something different. And it's just whether you become the mayor or you become an elected official, you still have that sense of stigma behind you, like Raz Baraka and
so many others. We can go on and on and
on. But he became a mayor. He became mayor of New Jersey. For
us, we can go on. This is one of those topics that's going to keep coming back to us. And no matter how many of these types of shows that we do, there won't be enough, because there will be, unfortunately, there will be another name. Yeah. But we did want to at least have the discussion. And we're hoping that the discussion may have sparked something.
Ignite other discussions.
And, maybe
around your table.
Or carry the discussion further. And, maybe it's time to have that talk with, your loved ones. I am the pastor.
I'm the Prince.
We thank you for joining us today on the Pastor
and the Prince
podcast. Until we're able to do it again.
Be well.
Be well.